I ignored the red flags and almost got myself unalived. I met Rick through a mutual friend one afternoon when I visited Ben at his mom's restaurant. My first impression of him? Unsettling, aggressive even. He pressed me for my number immediately, and when I refused, he wouldn't let up. As I tried to leave, he grabbed my arm, playfully but tightly. I should have trusted my gut right then, but I reluctantly gave in and called out my number, partly out of fear, partly just to get away. For some reason, I thought I was overreacting. Maybe he wasn't as dangerous as he seemed. So when Rick messaged me, I replied. He threw money around trying to impress me, and I'll admit, it worked. I'm not perfect. We talked on and off for months, and things seemed fine, until he asked to visit me. I declined. That's when the guilt trip started. He accused me of leading him on, of using him for gifts, and claimed I didn't care about him because I wouldn't even let him visit. The constant pressure wore me down, and I eventually caved. I shouldn't have. When Rick finally came over, I tried to make it casual. We watched a movie, but as the hours passed, his presence felt heavier and more intrusive. It got late, and despite my increasingly obvious hints, Rick showed no intention of leaving. I didn't want a confrontation, but I told him directly, "You need to go." His response? No. He refused to leave and started yelling about all the money he'd spent on me and how I was disrespecting him by kicking him out. The situation escalated so fast. He even accused me of setting him up for an ambush outside. I was terrified, so I called Ben, who lived nearby, to help calm the situation. After nearly 45 minutes of back and forth, Rick finally agreed to leave, but only after calling his security team to escort him out of the neighborhood. Relief washed over me when they finally picked him up, but that sense of safety didn't last long. A few days later, Rick called, crying and begging for forgiveness. He claimed he didn't know what had come over him and promised to make it up to me. He tried sending gifts, money, and even offered to pay my rent for a year. I rejected it all. A year passed without much contact, until one day he called again. This time, Rick invited me to an exclusive party at a club I'd always wanted to visit. It was invite only, and I couldn't resist the opportunity. So I went with him, and at first everything seemed fine, until he introduced me to his friends, as his girlfriend. I was stunned, completely blindsided, but I didn't make a scene. I brushed it off, not wanting to draw attention. After all, it was just a party, right? Then Rick asked if I could accompany him to his apartment nearby. He said he needed to grab something for a client before dropping me home. It sounded innocent enough, so I agreed. Once we arrived at his apartment, Rick invited me in, saying it would only take a few minutes. 30 minutes later, I started feeling uneasy. I told him I'd order a ride, but he urged me to stay, saying it was rude to leave without spending time together. And, conveniently, his client had canceled last minute. I stayed, against my better judgment. An hour passed. I asked again for him to take me home, but this time, Rick blatantly refused. My frustration turned to panic, and when I stood to leave, I realized something horrifying. The door wouldn't budge. There was no door handle, only a lock that needed a key. Panic sets in. I pulled out my phone and sent my location to my sister, praying she would see it. Just as I was about to answer her call, Rick snatched the phone from my hand and shoved me into the wall. I hit my head hard, my vision blurred, and I was completely dazed. Fear overwhelmed me as Rick began ranting about how I disrespected him, how I thought I was too good for him. He said I wasn't leaving, ever. I was terrified, not of dying, but of what he was about to do to me. I begged, apologized, said anything I thought would calm him down. For a moment, it seemed to work. He sat next to me, placing his hand on my thigh. And that's when something in me snapped. I shoved him off with all my strength, sending him into a fit of rage. He threatened me, said he would do unspeakable things, but I didn't care. My eyes scanned the room for something, anything to defend myself. Then, I saw it, a door leading to the kitchen. I bolted. He chased me, but I got to the kitchen first and grabbed a knife. Rick froze. In that moment, the fear evaporated, replaced by fury. I was ready to fight for my life, screaming for help. Rick started begging for me to calm down, but I didn't. I ran to the window, flung it open, and screamed even more. I screamed murder. I screamed rape. I screamed until I was hoarse. Within minutes, neighbors were banging on the door, demanding Rick let them in. That's when I had an idea. While Rick was distracted, I shredded my shirt with the knife and screamed even louder. Rick panicked. He dropped to his knees, but I didn't stop. I wanted everyone to know what kind of monster he was. Finally, the door burst open. Neighbors flooded in, pulling me to safety. The ladies rushed and covered me with clothes. I collapsed into their arms, shaking and sobbing. While the men interrogated Rick, he cried and claimed that I was a Schmeck's worker trying to frame him. I asked them to check his pockets. Someone checked Rick's pockets and found my phone and the SOS messages I sent to my sister with my current location and her missed calls. Realizing the game was up, while his neighbors were distracted, Rick bolted out the door. I had never seen anyone run that fast. When I saw my sister waiting outside, her face full of fear, I broke down again. She took me home, finally safe. Weeks later, Rick tried calling me again, begging for forgiveness, saying he'd changed. I warned him. If he ever contacted me again, I'd take him to court. That was the last time I heard from him. Sometimes we ignore the warning signs thinking we're overreacting. But trust me, listen to your gut. If someone feels dangerous, they probably are. Don't wait for things to escalate before you act.